Wonderful. Welcome again to another edition of Masterwall Mondays. Monday mornings with Masterwall here with Grant and Brian. I am Brian.
I am Grant.
And we are here to bring you education, entertainment, and engagement to make you a better salesperson and to do better jobs. Today, we have a guest here from Quikrete. As always, too, I just want to mention that email us, Grant or myself, with questions, comments, concerns, or just topics and who you want to have on here, and we'll try to do what we can to get them from anybody. Just let us know. But today we have Dale Nehls, National Sales Manager with Wall Systems with Quikrete. They are a partner with Masterwall with the stucco base coats. And so we're going to go through some stuff here when it comes to a different world of stucco and not eaves specific. It's one of the things that I was going to talk, and I told Dale before, Grant, on, really highlighting the biggest thing that stucco, when we talk stucco, and I think one of the biggest things that's out there, you drive by a job, you see the finish only. That's all we see. It's a textured finish. And people are like, oh, that's a nice stucco building. And there's really a difference between stucco and eaves. And really the wall system, predominantly what Quikrete is doing for us with these pre-blended stucco materials, is that difference. To highlight a few things, and I know we've been staying away from as much as we can the PowerPoint so that everybody knows, but basically wanted to highlight some of the key things in the partnership that Masterwall has with Quikrete specifically, and SpecMix to that matter. So here's just a general overall, and we'll get into some of these if everybody has questions on the specifics of these products. But remember, these are pre-blended, and that's what we'll get into, materials for consistency and quality. So the Quikrete products, the scratch and brown with fibers, the pump grade, in case those that are out west, I know a lot of times, and pumping it still. I don't see it a lot in the Northeast. And the fiber reinforced one coat stucco as well. Kind of going into the next thing. And this is what I'm going to ask you, Dale, on the lightweight fiber reinforced stucco. I had never seen that before. I don't know how big that is, but you can make sure we hit that a little bit. Finish coat. Also, there is a finish coat out there, but we want Masterwall on the finish, but that's okay. That's what we're here for.
Well, this is a different too, Brian. The difference between this finish coat and your finish coat, obviously, is ours is a cementitious. So
correct.
Compared to what you guys do.
Right. And that is a huge thing to know. I mean, I hear, especially on historic things, when people and architects that are getting picky, I mean, we know that some of them out there that say, no, I don't want any acrylic material on the finish. Here's the option, right? Here's the option that we can at least give as, again, educated distributors and product reps to know that that's what's out there.
Hey, Brian, but if they do use Quikrete finish coat stucco, they can use Masterwall paints and coatings. Just so you know. So hey, I'll plug that there.
Right. Absolutely.
You can.
Absolutely.
And get a warranty. All right.
Yes.
Hey, the pre-blended stucco products available in bulk super sacks. Big deal. I mean, I think I see it a lot. I don't see it on, again, residentially, but more commercially for sure. And this was the most exciting thing to me, just because I do have customers, at least in my territory, that have the SpecMix products that are out there. And this was something that just even last week really kind of firmed up, I think, with Dennis, our technical guy. So thank you, Dennis, if you're out there, and Dale, to really understand that, hey, the SpecMix products will work with our systems. It's a sister to you guys, right? Is that how you guys would describe that, Dale, as a sister company, or how do you?
We actually purchased SpecMix about 10 years ago now. I think it's been about 10 years ago. And with that, we've used the SpecMix line as well as a Quikrete line all over the country. So it's just a different branding for us in different markets, and it's preferred in certain markets just because of what the reality of what SpecMix does on the masonry side too.
Yeah,
our business.
And I'll mention my one specific customer that I was with that has SpecMix in their warehouse, and so they have this product. And so, like we talked last week, Dale, like, in that case, for a distributor, they don't have to have both product lines sitting on their floor if space is an issue. And in New York specifically, we know that could be an issue. And so that's one of those things where there is an option. If people, the applicators, are used to one product, they can stay with that product line that's there.
That's correct.
We'll get into some of this stuff as far as the stucco advantages. But Dale, I'm going to stop the sharing part of it so that we're here together. Why don't you just share a little bit first on how did you get to Quikrete? Some of your background, and what you see the biggest differences are with stucco as compared to eaves.
So I got my start in Quikrete about 13 years ago. But prior to that, I was a project manager for about 5 years. And previous to that, I worked for a general contractor and actually steered from general contracting to the electrical side of the world. Within 4 years with that electrical company, I was a project manager for them. And that's kind of the direction that I looked at. And then after doing several years of that, obviously I was like, man, I talk too much, number one, and I'm a pretty good person with other people. So I figured, hey, I better jump into the sales side of it. And, that's kind of written my story for the last, 15 years in sales. But in construction in general, it's been 24 years that I've been in construction. So I say that, and I'm just like, man, I feel super old, but we start young, and a lot of us have all done that, and we're super experienced by the time we get to 48, 50 years old, and pretty confident about where we kind of move ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But just jumping in further to that, you said, what's the difference between stucco and eaves, right? And sometimes I think we need to clarify. Sometimes we talk about stucco and eaves kind of appears to it, just because what you said earlier is like, we all just see the exterior side of that system. We all just see that finished side, and we all think, oh, that's a stucco system or that's an eaves system, and it just pops out. But obviously there is a huge difference between the two. And the first thing that I think of is, I think of how stucco should be related as, it's a hard coat stucco. It's an exterior plastering, right? And when I think of an eaves system, I think of like synthetic stucco. That's kind of the difference that I see the two in. And when we start talking about systems between the two and what's different about them, right, is with the eaves system, obviously, you have the insulation. You can still do an insulation hard coat system. It just doesn't give sometimes the same effect as what an eaves system does. I see like advantages of the stucco side of it is just our freedoms, our flexibilities on what systems we can do. Starting from a 3-coat traditional system, going to a 2-coat system when we start talking about that, over a CMU wall, over precast, something to that effect. And then you go into a 1-coat system and you start talking about 1-coat systems that actually can be applied over open framing, which only happens in specific markets across the country. Yeah. So those systems are kind of where we set and where we kind of base our backs to compared to what the eaves does. And the eaves is a little bit more technical in how it's done and where you're at. But I think the biggest part to what everybody needs to realize is the systems themselves start from the framing and moves out from there. And I think a lot of people look at it and say, oh, an eaves system or a stucco system can actually help what we've started with our frame. Right. If you don't have that good substrate to go, your stucco is just not going to look appearance-wise as what it should, right? If the windows aren't flashed correctly, if you don't have the proper casings, if you don't do the application correctly, you're going to have issues. And I think that's where a lot of people get into the stucco or the eaves industry, or look at that and say, oh, you're an exterior cladding and you can correct what we've put up on the wall as a structural side of it. Yeah. And I think that's a false thing. And I don't know what you and Grant's experience with that, but I see that a lot, because if your framing is not to what it's supposed to be, and I'll just hit a couple little things on framing that we see, is if you're more than 1/4 inch out of plumb in 10 feet, that's not acceptable. And we see that a lot, to where if your window's pushed out and you have more stucco or more mud at the window than you do on the field, or how the casings sit, that affects really the integrity of your product at the end of the day. And I think that happens also in the eaves world, is even though you're putting the foam up correct and you're doing that, if you have something out of plumb, you're still going to get a wall that doesn't look super straight. And I think that's something that we really need to look at it in turn. We talk about advantages of what the stucco is about, and there's so many endless freedoms. And this is where Masterwall comes in with us too, is yeah, we do have the base coat, but Masterwall has this ability to put any color through their acrylics or elastomeric finishes and give you anything you possibly want in a color or whatever your scheme is as an architect. And you can do that over top of our hard coat stucco. Yeah. And I think that's an advantage. And that's why, years ago that we started our agreements and our warranty systems that we do partner with you guys. And, talking about systems and the advantages is all stucco systems are code approved. They're code driven. They're impact resistant. They're fire resistant. We go through all of the standards very similar like anybody else's trade. We have to meet specific ASTM standards. We have to meet one coat standards, and we have to do all the testing just as anybody else has to do theirs to be able to qualify to be code driven. So
yeah. Grant, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, Dale, you talked about the partnerships you have with several Finnish manufacturers. You want to talk about kind of how that's given Quikrete an advantage, how you guys were forward thinking in that, and you recognized a market need that, hey, Quikrete may not have these acrylic synthetic textured finishes, but these companies do. So kind of explain that partnership and the forward thinking Quikrete had and why you have an advantage in the marketplace with those partnerships.
So we have throughout Quikrete, we have over 100 different facilities across the country. And we've been in business for 80 years. And our bread and butter is blending cement, right? That's our bread and butter. And when we step out of that side of it, there's a factor that we need to work with other people because our plants are made specifically to do that. And I've got 38 plants currently that are certified to do stucco material. And that's the advantage that we have with these acrylic manufacturers, is that we have so many facilities across the country that we don't have to ship our product a long distance to where the cost actually is driven up. And I think that's the bonus part of having us involved with acrylic manufacturers, is just we could keep the cost to be a little bit lower, but also give out a quality product for those acrylic manufacturers to say, hey, we believe in what Quikrete does. We believe in their pre-blended systems, and that's why we warrant those products with us as joint warranties.
Yeah, you said a couple. Go ahead, Grant.
No, I was going to say, and for us, we obviously have a stucco-based product called Simplaster, but to ship cement and sand all over the country from these small, facilities we have versus what you said, 38 certified stucco manufacturing facilities. Obviously for us to have a partner that we can say, look, we're not going to make you ship something from Georgia to, Washington, D.C. or New York City. Yeah. You guys can regionally supply much better and much more efficiently than we can. And that's why from Masterwall's perspective, we engage in these partnerships as well.
You mentioned a few things there regarding kind of the pre-blended part of it. And I want to make sure we get into that specifically, especially for the people that are listening that are spec writers and things like that, and architects and designers, because number one, you mentioned windows and the flashings and terminations. So don't forget, everybody, next week is where we're going to hit that. And that's why we're doing this kind of in serious steps, so that we have people that are coming on that are beginning to talk about specifically that work together, right? And so the flashings piece with York Flashing is next week, but specifically you were talking about the pre-blended part of this. And I wanted to make a note to saying that's why this is so important, because it's not just, we talked about, Dale, right? Dirt in a bag, which is what people might think. It's just dirt in a bag, or it's just cement with some sand, just chuck it in there, no big deal. And I want to highlight this one slide that you had at least to show everybody that I think is huge when it comes to why just dirt in a bag isn't a good thing to think about, and why the pre-blended part of this sometimes really does matter because of the inconsistency that might happen when somebody's doing it, right? I might be strong that day and I'm doing my work and I'm giving really good shovelfuls of sand that's going into that pre-blend of concentrate material, whereas Grant that day is really weak and lazy and tired and whatever, and he's doing a half a shovelful, right?
Right.
That's the benefit of being kind of the key focus of conversation here. But this is where the inconsistency can happen. So the pre-blended part of it, and you have some of this as far as all the testing. Again, we talked about this in a few episodes before. The science behind all of what we do in this world of wall systems, universally, eaves or stucco, whatever, wall systems, there's a lot of science and technical part behind all this, and your quality control and your research development is critical to a lot of what you're doing. So the pre-blended piece of that, speak to that, the water, some of the things we talked about, the water content, again, things I learned, right? Negative ionic charges, right? Like things like that we don't, I'm never going to think about.
So breaking through a little bit off of that and diving in a little bit on the sand pile compared to a pre-blended, and everybody understands what we talk about when we talk about concentrate. And if you take, and I'll break up regions of this, if you take a region, say like of Florida, they use a lot of masonry cement and they just add sand with that on the job site, so as a field mix, and that's what they use as their stucco product, okay? They do that out in California where they use plastic cement and they have the sand pile and they do that. So what we did, or what we developed years and years ago, is we developed a pre-blended product. And why we did this is because the advantages that you get of consistency, at the end of the day, that's what you're looking for, is to try and get as consistent as you possibly can with your products. As Brian, you mentioned that if you got somebody throwing shovelfuls of sand, and if they're throwing 12-pound shovels or 6-pound shovels, and you're supposed to hit a number per ASTM standards of, it's 3-to-1 ratio, 1 part concentrate to 3 parts sand. And if you're trying to hit that, you're not using a cubic foot box, or you're not using the right precautions to do that, you don't fall within specifications. And we can go and look at ASTM 926, and they got the proportions tables on there. And if you don't hit them, your product's not certified. And that's why we have our pre-blended. So what we do is we dry our sand to less than 0.5% of moisture in there. The national average in a sand pile is about 6% of moisture. So that just means if you get a ton of sand, you're getting 300 and some pounds of water in your sand, and you're paying for water. And your yields are different through that too. And what we found, and what we have tests for, that we can come out and talk to any of the architects, or we could talk to any of the contractors and show you what really happens. So in general, Brian, to go back with your negative ionic charge here, this is what happens with it, is if you take dried sand and you add moisture to it, okay, what happens is that moisture gets to those granules, and those granules in the sand, they actually act like magnets, that they repel each other, okay? If we look it up in the scientific world, that's what's called a negative ionic charge. So what happens with that, it's called sand bulking, okay? So when we add sand, or when we add water to that sand, that sand actually bulks. And so the way that we talk about it, or the way that we show people, is we actually do a yield test. We'll put 4 parts, 1 part concentrate and 3 parts sand, and we'll do that mix with wet sand, and then we'll do our side of it with all pre-blended, and we find out what we get. If you put 4 parts of field mix in, you're only getting about 62% of that material that you put into the mixer is what you're getting out, because of the sand and how it bulks. If you do it with pre-blended product, you get 87% of that material back out. So you're getting about 25% better yield out of a pre-blended than you do a field mix application. Yeah. And that's one of our key factors that we talk about and show and explain to an architect or to a contractor what the value of that pre-blended is.
Yeah. And I think it's hard, it's hard to really kind of put this in. I mean, again, I've had this issue in the Northeast where I'm at, right? Because of space. Space is an issue. I know one of my customers is on today as well. And space can be an issue when you have, let's say 80 bags of a concentrate versus, 800 bags or whatever it would turn into for regular pre-blended material. But it becomes a matter of communication throughout the product line and the job specific to say, okay, we're going to take it from the manufacturer's point of view. We're going to make sure we get the material on the job site, save space. We'll make 5 deliveries or 6 deliveries in that way. But something to kind of key in, because Carlos had that question over there, as far as what's really then the difference, or is there a difference beyond name of spec mix and Quikrete, since he has mentioned that one is usually more expensive, or is that also just demographic?
I think that's more demographic when it comes to it. Specifically, say like if you're talking about the fiber base coat and the spec mix line compared to the fiber reinforced stucco line, the difference between the two of them is the proprietary material that goes into it. So obviously, when you start talking about a concentrate or you start talking about a pre-blended product that's all put together, you put admixtures in there. If obviously fibers are added to all of that stuff, but you're putting water reducers in it, you're putting plasticizers in it, you're putting all the other admixtures into that product, and that's just the difference between what spec mix and Quikrete are. There's just different admixtures to it that may cost a little bit more on the spec mix side of it, and gives you maybe just a little bit different feel when you're putting it on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, contractors always talk about the weight of their, how much is the weight? It's heavy on the hawk, or does it spread well? How's it derby out, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And I think that's a valid question, and it's a valid point to just, that's the difference between the two, and that's why you might see a price increase off of one to the other one.
Mm-hmm.
Again, that's something in regions. And Carlos, again, feel free to reach out to me and let me know in some markets or whatever, and we can definitely look into that and help if that's the case, if there is an issue.
Mm-hmm.
Dale, I was going to kind of hit on, again, partnerships and how we work together. So a couple of successful projects, large projects that come to mind for me are the Gaylord Rockies project, which was completed out in Aurora. And then last year, the project at Disney, the Coronado Springs Tower,
right,
that we did. Kind of talk through, how Masterwall and Quikrete work together, maybe on the front end during construction and then post-construction, if you want to kind of talk about how we all work together to make sure those projects are completed successfully.
So it all starts at the very beginning, right? And everybody knows this. It all starts with the architect and what the architect is specifying out there. And if we fall within that part, and speaking of like Disney Springs, I think Reggie did a great job of getting some of that stuff started. And then we just go back and we communicate if it's with Masterwall or if it's with the architect, to just to go to those guys and actually communicate on why the systems are so valuable to what they're doing. I know in Denver on the Gaylord project, we went through several meetings with the general contractors, with the architects, just to be able to give them something that they really wanted. And I think that's our benefit between our two companies, and we work so well together in our sales side of it, but also in our technical side, is that we understand what our systems are supposed to be. We understand how my system works, and you guys understand how your system works to that, and it's an advantage to putting it all together. But I think it's more of just the part of our sales teams working together and putting these jobs in front of each other to make sure that we can eclipse that. And I mean, a good comment or a good part to that is, Grant, you just worked on another project in just north of Cincinnati, and we landed a project, and Grant put everything together and made a quick phone call and said, hey, to the distributor, that we need to look at this, and it's beneficial to use a pre-blended product. And you guys, put them in touch with me, and all of a sudden we end up getting a huge job together. And what a benefit it is to have partnerships with you guys, and the benefits of just, pushing us through these.
And I'll keep going on the partnership thing, only because of, you're talking about specs a lot. And one thing that doesn't happen a lot on the East Coast, right, is that system over framing like you see in California, let's say, and knowing those areas is really needed in the spec world, because when they going to put that in the specification, you've got to be able to say, okay, where is it? What's the climate? What's going on for that system? And so whether it's just Masterwall and Quikrete partnership together, it's also the two of us, let's say, as team, to go to that specification writer who's doing that. I know I have a couple of my friends here from Conspectus who are spec writers for anybody in the country or world for that matter. And so, they need to partner with us as well to say, okay, this is the project that we have and what's the best system for that. And go right down the line with everything we're talking about on the show each and every week, right? That really makes a difference of what is that spec going to look like. You mentioned lead, or you didn't mention lead, but I'll mention lead based on what you said by regions too. That's a huge deal. I know I see it a lot more up here in the Northeast. People ask, well, what's the lead point value there? And so that does matter because of where the material is coming from, for sure. Is there anything else?
Jump onto that one, Brian.
Yeah,
just to jump onto the lead side of it is it's so valuable, and that's another benefit of Quikrete and the partnerships that we have, is because having that many facilities across the country, we can actually get the raw material within that area or that 500-mile distance, So we actually reclaim product, obviously. We use reclaimed products, so fly ash and so on and so forth, that gets lead points. But also you get lead points for doing bulk by using bulk, because it's a recycled bag and so on and so forth. So there's huge advantages, and we offer those lead points to our customers.
Now, one thing that I think is really critical to mention is that the aspect of the partnership for us would be making sure that if they're going to need that warranty, it's got to come from one of our Masterwall distributors.
That's correct.
Right? That's a huge piece to this, because yes, we know that there's Quikrete all over the place and we can see it. One thing that I've always asked and wondered too is there is a difference. I'm gonna share a screen again, pull up a couple of things, but one of the things specific is going back to, and I'll cruise back the way I'm doing this now, at least. Going to the beginnings of this as far as the materials. Is there a difference? I get this question a lot. Is there a difference between the Quikrete product that one of our, let's say, distributors will sell, one of these, versus what's at Home Depot? And or if there's not, again, understanding if you need a warranty, everybody has to come from one of our distributors. So, we want the system to be funneling through, but it's also not to say that we don't want to see people using the right material. Is there a big, vast difference? Because I as a sales rep will get, I can buy that stuff over at Home Depot or Lowe's. And that really doesn't support necessarily where our systems are.
So when it comes to Home Depot's and Lowe's sales, we focus on just the basic products going into them, something that mom and dad think that they can do on the backside of their house in their fire pit or something to that effect, right? Something that's a do it best. So usually that's a scratch and brown product that's in a Home Depot that you see of our products. There's two markets across the country that actually carry the FRS. But those are down in the South. But otherwise, the scratch and brown with fibers is only sold through distribution. The stucco-based pump grade is only sold through distribution. And like I said, the one coat is only in a couple different markets in the South that Home Depots and Lowe's do. But we focus on selling through distribution through the Wall Systems program and utilizing those distributors, using those distributors to sell the product to the contractors, the people that are doing it correctly. And the more often that we use that distribution act, and the more often that we use our partnerships, I think the better we're going to get a solution or a solution to the project itself.
Yeah. Grant, go ahead. We want to speak to this, and it is 11 o'clock, so I'm going to do this. I'm going to mention this and say, I appreciate your time for sure. I'll end this part of it. We're going to continue to go. Stuart, I don't know if you want to stop the recording and then start it back up. You'll get two files that way. And then we'll be able to kind of continue on with saving this as well, and maybe put them up as a bonus